Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar as part of the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement webinar series. My name is Mark Graven. I'm the host and moderator today. I'm a senior advisor with KaiNexus. Our title for the session today is How to Design Organizational Habits That Propagate a Culture of Continuous Improvement. It says part two because, as you'll hear in a minute, this is a follow-on to a webinar a couple of weeks ago that introduced some of these topics, but today we get to take a deeper dive. I will introduce them in a second, but we are joined by our two presenters, Greg Jacobson, a co-founder and CEO of KaiNexus, and Morgan Wright, a customer marketing manager with KaiNexus. One other thing I want to mention is if this is your first time attending a KaiNexus webinar, we invite you to check out our website, kainexus.com, or you can scan the QR code. We'll have this up again during the Q&A session. Our mission is to spread continuous improvement, so we invite you to come learn more about our platform and how we might be able to support you in the important improvement work that you're doing. Dr. Greg Jacobson, again, is co-founder and CEO of KaiNexus. He graduated from Washington University in St. Louis in 1997 with a BS in biology. He attended Baylor College of Medicine and completed a residency in emergency medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he then stayed on as faculty. But back in 2004, it was Greg's observation and his research around operational inefficiencies and unrealized continuous improvement opportunities that really resulted in the founding of KaiNexus. And we're also joined today by Morgan Wright. She is the customer marketing manager for us here at KaiNexus. In her role, she partners with customers to develop and execute on a communication strategy to engage their organizations in KaiNexus and in spreading continuous improvement. She was from Austin. She graduated from Baylor University with a degree in marketing. So I'm excited that you are both here with us today. And with that, let me hand it over to you.
Great. So, Mark, we are thrilled to be here. This work that Morgan and I are going to present, we've been working on it. I think the first time I realized that habits were so critical in helping to form behavior was 2015, 2016. It wasn't until about 2019, 2020 that I got really serious about learning about habits. And then it wasn't until maybe a half a year ago that Morgan and I started talking and started realizing that there was this huge body of knowledge that we could utilize to help our customers at KaiNexus kind of create the habits that they wanted to create. And really that this habit science, if you will, was integral to understanding in order to create that culture of continuous improvement. And we define culture as people like us do things like this. And so we did a webinar about 3-4 weeks ago, and that QR code will take you to a place where you can watch that. But I wanted to it's like when you do season 2 of a show, how there's a little recap. We're going to do a very quick recap of the first webinar. It is not critical that you have watched it. If you haven't watched it, you can watch it afterwards. But they stand within themselves. But I think going a little bit into some of the high points will help give context to some of these points. Do you want to go ahead and advance? So everything that we're going to talk about originates in these 3 books. We've read beyond these, but really everything that you need to know will be found by either Duhigg's Power of Habit, Clear's Atomic Habit, or Fogg's Tiny Habit. And what we try to do here is synthesize the main concepts. And at times we're modifying someone and we're fusing, and what we're trying to do is provide a cohesive body of knowledge that we believe CI experts need to really understand pretty intimately in order for them to help their organizations create a culture of continuous improvement. So please check these books out. We read them from left to right, but you could probably do them in any order. The first concept I want to mention, and we can go to the next slide, is from Fogg. And so as we're thinking about doing an action or doing a routine, there's really kind of 2 major axes to think through whether or not a human's going to do it. And on the x-axis, we have ability. right? It kind of makes sense. If you don't have the ability to do something, or to do something is really, really hard, you decrease the chance of doing it. And so on our x-axis, the further to the right we get, the easier it is for something to do. And then the second thing is motivation. That's on the y-axis here. And the lower the motivation someone has, the lower the chance they're going to do it. Or the higher the motivation someone has, the greater the chance. So you can probably put together that if you have really high motivation to do something that's really easy, you are going to land on the right side of the action line for Fogg that Fogg describes. So this is Fogg's behavior model. And I think this is a great way to think as you're trying to influence, teach, coach people at your organizations, and you're finding that the action is not happening. Ask yourself, is it a motivation or is it an ability? And how can you move that action to the right of the action line? The second major concept from our prior talk is understanding the habit loop. And there's a couple different versions of this in the books that we mentioned, but I'm a simple person as ER doctors are, and so I like the habit loop with just 3 simple things. And really, if you start understanding that about 50% of the things that you do out of sheer habit. There is no thought process that goes into those things. And that is this recognition that there's going to be a cue that triggers you to do something. Then you're going to do this routine. And then by doing this routine, you are going to get a reward by doing it. And that ultimately will provide the motivation that the next time you encounter this cue, you will do the routine. So it could be something as simple as when I walk into a room, the room is dark. I do the routine of flipping on the light switch and I get the reward of not running into things. I can see things. Mm-hmm. Or it could be something as complex as, the cue is we are doing a strategy check-in with the senior leadership at an organization on Friday. The routine is we're going to go through all the major initiatives that we're going through, and the reward is that we can communicate and accomplish those goals a little bit better. And then the final thing we touched on, and then I am going to talk a little bit less, is going to be this concept of personas. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, why do y'all have a marketing person talking about habits, right? And that was because Morgan and I, what we realized is that as we're communicating the behaviors that y'all want people to do in your organization, that really what we're talking about is designing those routines and those habits and really becoming intentional about it. And personas is a word taken right out of product development and marketing, of kind of categorizing all the people in your organization into one of 4 groups. And this has been a concept that we've been using at KaiNexus for a number of years, and really you can really group every single person in your organization, primary kind of role that they have, as one of these 4 personas. So I'd love, Mark, if it's possible, people could answer: are you an executive persona? Are you a senior leader? Are you in the C-suite? Are you doing continuous improvement, perhaps less than 5% of your day? Or are you a CI coach? 90+% of your day is, Mark?
Well, we've got 1 CI coach who's put that in the chat. Then 2 more CI coaches, CI coach.
And that's typically the persona that we're engaging with the most, and the ones that are actively going out there, increasing their knowledge. And so a CI coach would be someone that is spending 90+% of their day either doing continuous improvement themselves or teaching their organization. The leader persona here is that middle manager. It's, I lead a team of 5 people up to maybe 500 people. I like to think of the leader persona is the one that does all the hard work of continuous improvement. That's not to take anything away from the CI coach or the executive. And then the frontline person is that person that's really, let's be honest, adding all the value of the organization. They might be spending 5 to 10% of their work doing, or maybe even down to 1%, depending on how the organization works, of doing continuous improvement. And so kind of thinking about which of these 4 groups are the people that I'm trying to influence their behavior, and then designing the habit loops that you want to create is going to be a far more successful structure than simply saying, oh, well, I'm just going to train some people and hope for the best. So that is essentially a recap of webinar number 1. And now webinar number 2, we're going to try to answer, and I will hand it over to Morgan.
Absolutely. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to add one more note here. So that connection between personas, which Greg described really well, and habit loops is that instead of trying to create these individual habit loops for everybody in your organization, which sounds next to impossible, what we found is that you can create essentially one or a couple of habit loops for each of these personas, and it's much more scalable and it works all the same, right? Since each of these personas typically have similar needs, responsibilities, goals, these habit loops for each of them is going to be kind of what we're teaching here today. Okay, so how do we actually create a good habit? If you guys were with us last time, we dug into a couple of overarching themes about how to create a good habit, but today we want to just dig a little bit deeper. So what we're talking about today is these 3 laws of behavior change. So we just want to make a note. This is kind of our little modification off of James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, 4 laws of behavior change. But all we did was we combined obvious and attractive. And I'll kind of give some reasoning behind why we made that modification here in a minute. But just to give you an overview, think of these laws as a framework for designing each stage for optimal habit formation. So the reasoning behind the modification was that with these 3, it actually fits perfectly with the habit loop. And like Greg mentioned, we use Duhigg's habit loop. So we're kind of combining information from everybody. But think about it like this. So make it obvious and attractive is in regards to our cue, right? How do we make that reminder obvious and attractive? Make it easy is in regards to that routine. We talked through that during our last webinar. So important to make that routine easy, especially at first. And then satisfying, of course, those rewards, right? So we'll dig into what we mean by rewards later on, share some examples, but just want to give some context as we're diving into each of these laws. So we're going to start with making it obvious and attractive. So remember, this is the cue. So the first thing we'll be talking through is habit stacking. So habit stacking, as you can see, is this formula. So after I do my current habit, that current habit being the cue, to remind you to do that new habit. So what's cool about this is that it's really one of the best ways to build a new habit by identifying a current habit you have and simply stacking the new habit afterwards. So the example we use here is after I check my email in the morning, a current habit, I will log into KaiNexus, right? You could apply this to whatever it may be. So the reason that habit stacking works so well is that your current habits are already built into your brain, right? So by linking the new habits into these current habits already in your brain, it'll be more likely to stick in the future.
And I think that there's a lot of different ways that this can be applied. One, to you personally, but then two, and perhaps more importantly for this crowd, to think about if you're, let's say, you're trying to develop a habit of doing huddles. And if you could figure out, okay, well, let's go to the leader and let's look at the environment and figure out, well, what does that leader do in a normal daily routine that we could almost hook onto? So, perhaps it's, 5 minutes before a shift starts or the doors open or the line gets going, there's something that happens. That could be the best place to try to stack the new habit that they're trying to do. Let's say they are going to, that 5 minutes before, say, oh, okay, cool, Morgan, you're going to work on line 2 today, and Mark, you're going to work on line 3, and you want them to start a huddle where they're reviewing issues of the day before or ideas that were inserted the day before or look at a certain metric. That would be an ideal time to recommend designing this new current behavior.
Absolutely. So the next thing we'll be talking through about how to make it obvious and attractive is going to be this idea of designing your environment. So essentially, the environment that you surround yourself with ultimately determines the default actions that you take on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, whatever it may be. So really, whatever it in front of us is going to set off that cue for what we should be doing. I know for me at home, I have, my couple of vitamins that I take right next to my computer. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could put this away, but if I put it away, I might forget it, right? So making sure that you're keeping those things, top of mind and right in front of your eyesight is so important. So kind of an example of how we use this and how we've seen successful KaiNexus customers do this is by using signage throughout their organization. If they have in-person, in-office employees, meaning posters, stickers, any other kind of reminders that are going to keep in your eyesight, and you're able to kind of determine what is that message that you want to keep in their eyesight, and setting up that environment to do so. So as a CI leader, as many of you are, it's so important that you're setting up each of these personas environments to ultimately set them up for success, to initiate that cue, to act as that reminder.
Yeah, I think a personal example of this for me, Morgan, is the habit that as you've known, I used to not work out. And over the last several years, I've developed a habit of working out. And I found that for me, literally having my workout clothes at the foot of the bed was one of the things that kind of created a little bit of the habit stacking, or kind of sandwiching, I guess. It's a habit to wake up in the morning. I don't know. But it also helped design the habit, or design my environment, where I didn't need to go find the workout shoes, find the socks, find the shirt. They're all just right there, and it makes that super easy. So how would that apply to a continuous improvement situation? If you're, for example, let's say you're having them design, let's say you're using KaiNexus, the designing of the habit may be, on the workstation, make sure there's an icon to KaiNexus. Let's say you're doing a paper system. Well, where you do your huddle, have the paper cards right there to make that easy, or maybe where they check in their time card or something like that. But really put yourself in the persona of the frontline worker or of the leader, and make it as easy as possible to make the right decision. I like to call it sometimes decision architecture. Make it easy. Design your environment to make it easy to make the decision that you want folks to make.
Exactly. And then the next part of our cue is going to be this idea of either joining a culture with a desired habit, or kind of creating a culture with that desired habit, right? So typically as humans, we tend to adopt habits that are praised and that are approved by our culture because we have a strong desire to fit in, to belong to a tribe, right? So we typically imitate the habits of these three groups, meaning the close, this could be our team at work; the many, this could be everybody in our organization; the powerful, this could be leaders, executives, or other influencers in your organization. Greg, I feel like you have good color about this.
I wanted to mention, there was a comment about using Gmail with times and specific dates and times that pop up, which I think is a great example of, that's a perfect cue. It's like right in line with where you need to do the work. So it's designed to be right there, and there's a cue. So I just wanted to call that out. That was a good example of many of the concepts we're talking about. So I think, if I'm thinking, okay, I'm a CI coach and I am trying to influence a behavior of A3 problem solving, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm really struggling with this person to think about. I train them in A3 thinking, and then they will go back into their environment, and then they don't do another A3. So the question I would have is, well, all the other people that they're working with, are they doing A3 thinking? And I'll bet you'll find probably not. Or what about the entire factory, or that entire group? Is the majority of people doing that type of behavior? Maybe not. And then I think the one that's probably the most actionable is figure out who are the most powerful people in the group that you're trying to influence. And that is not necessarily only a title thing. The title's easy. The person that's the highest title of the leader group, really spend time there. But when you're also thinking through that group, see if you can't figure out who are the influencers of that group. It's like, oh, Betty's been here for 37 years. If Betty doesn't like it, it's not going to happen. So I would spend time on aligning with Betty and figuring out how can you influence Betty, because Betty is actually a really powerful person in that group. And these are going to be kind of things you're troubleshooting and thinking through as you're designing a behavior, as you're thinking about like rolling out a new behavior at an organization or at a part of your organization.
One other thing I wanted to note here is that I think especially this is helpful with new hires as well. I think we all have new hires coming in. You have to get them trained. If you can have a culture where everybody is already doing the improvement work and it's a part of everybody's routine, that new hire is going to come in and start to emulate what everybody else is doing. And that training and that on-ramp is going to be a heck of a lot easier, right?
That's a great question. What if Betty doesn't want to change any behaviors or anything at all in general? That's a really difficult situation. And, I always think establishing connection and alignment and understanding everyone's needs and pain points are going to be the way to kind of creating that empathy are going to be a way potentially to influence and really getting down to what are the true objections. The more you get to know somebody, the more you might realize Betty's seen this routine 35 times in the last 37 years, and that might be it. Or perhaps there's some other aspect about Betty. Now, we'll say, and I don't know if Mark would agree with me or not, I do think that there's 10% of people that if you just mention the word CI, they're totally bought in, no questions asked. There's probably 80% of people that can be influenced. They're in a gray area, and if they are presented things in the right way, and then then it'll change their behavior. And there's probably 10% of people. It literally doesn't matter what you do. You could literally be here. I want to give you $1,000 or whatnot, and they're still not going to be interested in doing that. So my recommendation would be to focus on the 90% versus that 10%. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, just real quickly, and Chris Burnham, our colleague, put in the chat, probably worded better than I would have. Resistance is a cue to be curious, right? So I don't like labeling. The thing I would add is I don't like labeling whatever percentage as being quote unquote resistant. I think, as Chris was saying, we have to lean in and understand what their concerns are, have a conversation about that, and sometimes maybe somebody has been damaged by decades of working in the wrong culture. And that's a difficult situation. But, I would encourage leaders to reflect on trying to understand what's behind quote unquote resistance instead of just saying, well, giving up on them,
And Jake added, we find success with Betty by including her and developing the change. And I think that's just a great point. I don't want to invalidate the first comment, which is this is really hard. And some people, it seems like you could really invest a lifetime and seemingly they won't move. So we all empathize with the first point or the first comment in this chain. And I don't want to invalidate how difficult. If it was easy, every company would have a culture of continuous improvement. So,
right. Great point. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the routine part.
Speaking about easy.
Exactly. I know. I love that you said easy. I was like, that fits in perfectly, right? So again, how do we make it easy? So the first thing we'll jump into is making your habits small. I talked through this last time. I think the example we gave was you're trying to do push-ups every day. Instead of trying to do 50, try to do 2, right? So here we talk about the 2-minute rule. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do, right? Lowering that barrier of entry and making it as easy as possible to participate in that new routine. So people often think it's kind of weird or strange to be so excited about doing 2 push-ups or reading 1 page or making 1 sales call, submitting 1 idea, whatever it may be. But the point here is to not do that one thing. The point is to master the habit of showing up, right? Once we can master the habit of showing up, it's much, much easier to start building upon that. And the next part of making it easy is this idea of automating your habits.
I just wanted to add one thing to the 2-minute. How would this apply to continuous improvement? So if let's say you're trying to develop a culture that identifies problems or brings ideas to the table, creating a process that it makes it incredibly easy to submit that is going to be far better than creating a process that maybe, let's just say the process would be, give me your subject and your observation or your problem or your idea, and then put in the card or submit the form or hit the submit button in KaiNexus. What we have found that just adding 1 extra question to that process, categorize it. Even if it's optional, just categorize it. And what do you think the impact is going to be? Every time you ask more and more things as part of that form, it will decrease the chance that someone is not going to submit it. So it's a great example of, if I were starting out the process of developing an idea culture, I would make it as super simple as possible at the beginning to put in ideas, and I would encourage those. And, perhaps after a year or 2 where that habit is really ingrained and people are doing it, if it makes it easier for the process to add extra questions, you could do that. But starting out with laborious processes, especially when it's a voluntary thing to engage with, is going to decrease the chance that habit will be created in that person or that group of people.
Yep, that was a great example, Greg. Okay, so now we'll jump into automating your habit. So read this quote here. The best way to create a good habit is to automate it so you never have to think about it again. So this idea of automation can make your good habits concrete, and they can make your bad habits almost impossible to do. So this really is the ultimate way to lock in future behavior without relying on willpower. So we discussed this in our last webinar. Kind of this idea of the FOG behavior model is this idea of willpower, motivation. It's not this high motivation or willpower every single day, right? So trying to rely on that every single day is not necessarily reliable, right? So for example here, KaiNexus, you're trying to move an idea forward. You're a leader or you're a CI coach. If you're using KaiNexus to move this idea forward, it'll notify you, right? You can put in a couple clicks, you can send it along to the right person, rather than, let's say you're trying to, okay, who gave that idea? I need to go find them. Where are they? How do I move this along, right? It's much more willpower, much more brain power than, using a technology possibly to automating this improvement habit.
I mean, it's essentially the major reason why we exist as a company, right? We're trying to kind of automate the ability to do the right behaviors related to improvement. There's no way to automate improvement. Improvement takes critical thinking. It takes creativity. It takes empathy. It takes psychological safety. It takes so many things. But if there's a way to make it a little bit easier, it would almost be like, I want to develop a habit of running. Well, it's going to be easier to develop a habit of running wearing running shoes. And so any opportunity versus dress shoes. I didn't complete my thought. God, I've never not completed my thought. So any place that you can automate the type of behavior that you want, let's say, did you give the social media example?
No, that's a great example.
Yeah. Like if you want to decrease the amount of times you're checking your social media feed, removing the app from your phone is going to be a way that's just going to make that super simple, because now you have to go download the app and so on. I mean, it's just like a whole process to be able to do that. And so these are a key aspect to think about. How can you design the behaviors for the people, and if there are ways that you can automate it, certainly automate. Like when you complete out an improvement, if you want to, or complete out a project, if you want to recheck it in 30 days or 90 days to make sure that your test of change worked and you're getting the result you want, creating a reminder in some way, whether it's in KaiNexus or your to-do or your on your calendar, is going to work far better than saying, oh, I'll remember to check it in June. So.
Right. That's something that I do if I have something that I have to do quarterly. Same thing. Okay, I've done it, but I have to remind myself to do it again. And that's a much easier way than just trying to remember. Okay, so our last law is going to be this idea of how do we make it satisfying? So again, this is thinking about setting up the right rewards and making sure that we are rewarding. So of course, the right rewards are so important. So what is rewarded is repeated. What is punished is avoided. So it's so important that we are rewarding the right way until the habit is actually a habit. A lot of the information in these books kind of harps on the fact that once that habit is established, the reward isn't quite as important. But what we feel, especially in improvement work and a continuous improvement culture, that reward might be a little bit more important for us, because that habit, may change. Things change throughout the day. So making sure that we're kind of feeding that habit loop is going to be important throughout. Okay, so then this idea of never missing twice. This is one of my favorite concepts of learning through habits, because I love this idea that consistency does not require perfection, right? We can miss a day or, mess up somehow. I know personally, I'm trying to go on a walk every day, right? And sometimes I just don't do it. But kind of keeping this in mind has helped me not to be so hard on yourself, right? It's okay, you miss a day. Let's not make a habit of making the missing a new habit, right? Just get back on the horse and, continue along. Inconsistency is just a part of things.
I think it's such a great point that there's clearly a thread in all of the habit science that says frequency and consistency is far better than kind of this depth. So for instance, let's say you're trying to learn how to play the guitar. It's far better to play 10 minutes every day than to play 2 hours once a week. That establishes the tracks in your brain, the muscle memory. There's so many aspects to kind of habitual behaviors needing to be consistent and frequent. And then if you change from, there's also some other concepts that we're not going to get into, I don't believe in this talk. We might sneak them in somehow, of changing from goals to identities, right? And so if you're so focused on the goal of, I want to walk every day, well, then when you miss a day of walking, there's this kind of internal self-shame kind of track that goes in your head. I can't believe I did that. This is like, I missed my streak, or I'm the goal of walking every day. But if you say, I want to be the identity of someone that walks daily. Well, when you miss on Tuesday, the person on Wednesday that walks daily is just going to go for a walk. So how does that apply to a continuous improvement culture? Well, if you are an organization, a learning organization, an idea organization, a huddle organization, if you identify, the second floor of Factory A, we're the kind of people that do huddles every day. We check in and make sure that we understand the problems of the prior day and understand how we're going to make ourselves successful for the future day. If there's a fire, I guess I meant that figuratively, not literally. And on Wednesday, you didn't do the huddle. Well, that's no big deal. You just come back to it on Thursday and you redo that huddle. And so it's that frequency. And then, of course, making it easy and decreasing the time, all those things, these all are blending together.
So now that we've gone through all three of our laws, we've kind of dug into, how we apply these laws and what we can do, we want to jump back into the habit loop and start to share some examples of cues and rewards that some of our most successful KaiNexus customers have implemented that have really helped them drive that adoption, drive engagement, and really to kind of solidify that CI culture in their organizations.
Before we kind of dive into cues and rewards, because I really want to take some time on those, we wanted to identify, well, why aren't you talking about routines? And the routine is really the DMAIC process that you are doing projects, your strategy deployment, your Hoshin work. It's how do you manage an idea board? It's all of the things that you're already experts in, or that you're incredibly knowledgeable. I know we don't like the word expert. You're incredibly knowledgeable about doing. And so our recommendation is, what are the routines that make sense for your organization? And then if you're introducing that to another person, make it easy, design your environment, et cetera, all the things we talked about. But what I think is often missed in the conversation, and which, Mark can attest to this, it was missed for almost the first 15 years of me in this work, is this lack of recognition and understanding of how important the cue and the reward is to create that. And so we want to go through some different cues, and if you come up with other cues, please toss them in the comments to share that we have found that really work. And look, we're KaiNexus, so our examples are going to be KaiNexus focused, but our mission is to spread continuous improvement. And I think almost all of our examples, we'll try to give non-KaiNexus examples, but I think all of these can translate into, whatever medium or technology you're using to do this type of work in. So, all right, let's jump into it, Morgan.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so our first example, kind of touched on this earlier. These, put it in KaiNexus reminders or whatever that reminder you want it to be, putting up the signage, right? Design your environment with these right in eyesight. So whether it's, we have little stickers or posters or digital signage, whatever it may be, get in front of people and get that message in front of people. So these stickers, we've seen them laminated and put on like shared computer spaces, or this, poster signage, making sure that it's in a well-trafficked area. If people are coming into the office, of course, every day, signage should definitely be a part of that communication plan. Of course, some of us living in this digital world, this Zoom world still, if you have more remote, employees versus in person, always making sure that you are adopting these strategies to make sure that you're getting in front of your people.
And I think it's important here to refresh these things. We've all seen the sticker that was put up 5 years ago that's been worn down and everyone ignores. And so kind of be mindful of that. This is the time to engage your marketing department. Your marketing department at your organization, they are experts in communicating and keeping things fresh. And so this isn't you've done it once and you checked it off your list, and then 3 years later you're like, I don't know why this is going on. The other thing is this can be branded to be specific to your organization. Morgan hinted at that, but we have a lot of people at KaiNexus that are customers that they call it the Idea Network, or they call it Innovation Station. It's something that it's made sense for their organization for a long time, and so I'm always hesitant of saying a program, because programs feel like they're going to have a start date and an end date. But if that effort can be branded and internalized into the DNA of the organization, and that's going to be far better than something where like, what is this, and you're changing it every 3 months or things of that nature.
Absolutely. Yep, I think that refresh is so important. And again, just noting that just because we have great idea, put it KaiNexus, making sure that message is true to your organization and that you're speaking to what these people are being kind of encouraged to do. So our next cue is going to be this idea of scheduling time to process notifications. You could use this idea with more than just notifications, but in KaiNexus, making sure that we're going through our notifications is a huge part of really digging into the platform and making sure that you're staying on top of, items, ideas, things that you're collaborating with people on. So kind of before we can check our notifications, this cue of scheduling that time. I know I'm a big calendar person. I put everything on my calendar that I do. So if I put a 15-minute block, process my notifications, go through my KaiNexus notifications, that's really going to help me to remember to actually sit down and do it. And not only that, but making it a priority. Life happens, fires happen, right? So if something has to be booked over, making sure that we're making it a priority to move that and doing it weekly. I think that goes back to this idea of consistency, right? Just making it a habit of being consistent.
And I think this is one of the things that we've been experimenting with and working with a number of organizations, trying to get executives. We hear this phrase. Executives are very pro continuous improvement. They really want to get behind it. And then you talk to the CI coach, and but they're not doing anything necessarily to promote it on a day-to-day. It's because likely the routine that you want that executive person to do has not been designed. And so kind of making sure you've designed what is the routine, how do you want them to interact? And then literally the cue can be scheduling time with them. And it can be 15 minutes a week to start that, 15 minutes, I get it, but to start that 2-minute easy behavior that you want them to do and will benefit the whole organization. And they've communicated their desire to help promote this type of work. And so scheduling time is super important. And then of course, again, if let's say you're doing this twice a week with an executive, 15 minutes a day, if you don't miss for 3 weeks in a row, because that's going to hurt your habit. Miss once, and then if it needs to be moved, move it and say, oh, I understand that there was, you're fighting this fire and that needs to be moved. And, what other time today can we join, meet virtually or physically to do whatever the routine that you want to do is. So I think that we should not underestimate the value of having something on the schedule and sticking to that routine when the cue comes up, which in this case would be the time.
Absolutely. So our next cue example is this idea of recurring huddles or team meetings. We talk about this a lot, but again, this is having something on the schedule, a time where you and your team can come together virtually in person and keep those frontline users accountable for submitting ideas, following through. Maybe this is going to be an inspiration. They see one of their peers, submitting a good idea, and that idea sparks something in them, and then they share their idea. But this is going to keep leaders accountable as well, because it's important as a leader to making sure that you're talking to your team about these ideas. You're showing that their ideas matter, right? They're not just going to submit something and then we're never going to hear about it again. That is a huge negative. So seeing that life cycle of the idea, making sure that we're keeping things out of that overdue card or slot. But if you're not using a virtual huddle board in KaiNexus, however you're doing your huddles or your team meetings, just making sure that it's regular and consistent. You're talking through these improvements. The next example we're going to share is these regular CI mentions from leaders and executives on a consistent basis. So Greg really just touched on this, but we really want to harp on the huge, huge importance of executive and leader engagement. This is going to trickle down to the front line. If the executives aren't talking about it, the executives aren't showing that it matters, why would it matter to everybody else, right? So this is going to be instrumental. And this can be something as simple as, great idea. Have you put in KaiNexus, something in passing? Maybe they share it over, a lunch on break, or this could be on an all hands call or whatever it may be. Wanted to give a special shout out to the following people who have entered an idea this month. So not only is that kind of a reward for those who have submitted the idea, but it's going to act as a cue for their peers to make sure that they're submitting ideas because they see that their leaders and their executives show that it's important.
So we I mentioned it from the standpoint of the executive routine can and should be, and we'll talk about this more in our next webinar, can and should be the cue and the reward of other personas. And so if we talked about booking time on a calendar for you to do your own personal thing, we talked about booking time on a calendar to do, a group habit. And now this is almost kind of intermittent cues that, if they come from the right people at the right times, can trigger people. Mark just came and did a gimbal walk. That reminded me, oh yes, I've been frustrated by this, or I had this idea we could save time, and that could be a cue. So we should never underestimate getting the local leaders replaced, or the executives of mentioning this in their daily communications, weekly communications. Really, whenever they need to beat the drum, they're going to be the drummer, so to speak, of the improvement culture band.
And I think this also kind of proves the interconnection of these habit loops. We talk about how each persona has their own habit loop, but it really starts to show how each of them affect one another. And it really kind of is this overarching, idea of one person's habit loop can't be perfect without, there's no perfect, but it can't be running well without the others running well as well. So our next cue before we move on to rewards is going to be this CI slide on shared workspaces on a rotating announcements board. So similar to how we talked about signage earlier, but I wanted to make this note because I would have never thought about this when I first started working here, is this idea of just simply changing the screensavers on shared computer spaces have been many of our most successful customers, one of their key parts of their communication. I was talking with somebody recently, and she really credits this. And she says that people are always kind of fighting to get that screensaver space, because if you're in an organization where people are using those shared computer spaces daily, this is almost, a ideal way. This is almost a secured way to make sure that you're getting this message in front of people on the computer. And then now jump. Oh, go ahead.
The brain slide. No, you're good.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Okay, so we were going to talk about rewards. And oftentimes rewards kind of have different connotations, different meanings. So when we're talking about rewards, we're talking about triggering the dopaminergic system, the neurotransmitter dopamine. And I'm on a crusade of trying to get dopamine not to get such a bad rap. All you hear about is dopamine. It's related to addiction. And the classic example is, I'm addicted to my social media, and it just hits this little dopamine feed. And let me tell you, without dopamine, we might not as a species be where we are today. Dopamine is thought to be the primary neurotransmitter for learning and motivation. And so what we're not talking about is rewarding people necessarily with monetary reward. That's a whole different webinar topic. We're talking about triggering the dopaminergic system in a positive way to kind of create that sense of satisfaction of engaging in the routine that, as a CI expert, you're trying to get your organization to engage in.
Absolutely. So without triggering that reward, without triggering that dopamine, this habit loop is not going to be a loop. Continue. So the first reward that we want to talk about is badges. So we love badges here at KaiNexus. We have silly badges for whatever it may be, but they're a huge part of our platform as a whole, not only for ourselves, but for our customers as well. So I think everybody, you may be familiar with the term gamification. So the name kind of implies what it is. It's this idea of gamifying your system. So you see this in plenty of other apps and platforms, whether it's personal or professional. But in KaiNexus, badges are a really easy way to reward people when they have done a desired behavior. So if you're utilizing custom badges, you can essentially create a roadmap of what you want people doing in your system by literally rewarding those specific actions within KaiNexus.
And if you're not using KaiNexus, you can still use the badge concept. So
exactly. You see badges all over. I know a lot of KaiNexians do Duolingo, and they're always talking about the badges they're earning there. So badges, I think, are a really well-studied, really interesting way to engage and reward people. The next reward we want to talk through is this idea of individual recognition for an idea. So we talked about this a bit in the queue, but idea recognition could happen so many different places. And I always say it's important to push this wherever your organization, those individuals are kind of used to receiving information. So if you use email, an intranet, company newsletter, maybe physical signage, pushing out these ideas of the month or, project of the month, whatever it may be, it's so important to highlight. So a few examples we have here, you could do an idea of the month, poster. You could do this on your intranet. You could have, an executive or a CEO send out an email saying, here, watch this video about this cool idea, shout out to this person. It goes such a long way in rewarding that behavior. And this next idea of rewards, again, similar to badges, where that's kind of a reward inside of our system. This is another reward that happens inside of KaiNexus. So again, this idea of, you're going to hear us say this a lot, recognition from that CI coach, from the leaders, from the executives. So what we're really trying to emphasize is getting leaders to interact with these ideas and items inside the system. So whether it's a comment, awesome idea, or whether it's just simply a like or an acknowledgement, something that's showing that not only, hey, this is an awesome idea I have, this feels good that my leader thinks this is a good idea, but again, it shows people that leaders and executives thinks that improvement is important enough for them to go get inside KaiNexus on a consistent basis and be working in the platform as well. Okay. So our next reward, again, we mentioned this earlier, you're going to hear us kind of saying the same thing a couple of times in different ways. So this idea of going to Gemba is so important. So this is going to be so important for those executives to get that face time with those frontline people that they may not have an opportunity to work with on a day-to-day basis, see what's going on, hear what's going on, where if they just heard kind of the highlights or the high level, they may not have heard, a little snippet or a sentence or something that really resonated with them. And again, this is going to be that reward for those frontline users to show my executive cares, they're engaged. And this is going to be really important for y'all as CI leaders to make sure that you're scheduling your leader, your executive to come to a huddle, to come to a team meeting a couple times a month, whenever it may be, just making sure that you're getting them there on a semi-consistent basis.
And I got to give a quick shout out to a fellow ER doctor, but Dr. Eric Dixon is probably the best story I've heard. He is the CEO of a huge medical system, UMass Memorial, 18,000 people, and he goes to several idea huddles every week and shows up. And can you imagine a CEO of that kind of large organization showing up to your huddle of 5, 10, 20 people? That's a pretty cool recognition reward right there.
Very cool. I know we were so excited to hear that when we went on site. And then our last reward, I know we're running up against the clock here, is going to be this idea again of leader praise right in the moment of when an idea is said, when it is submitted. You'll find in a lot of these books when you read them, this idea that rewards need to directly follow that routine, or your brain isn't going to necessarily connect the two, and that pathway isn't going to be formed. So making sure that great ideas in the huddle today, I especially like XYZ right after that huddle meeting, is going to be that quick, that consistent reward that's going to activate that dopamine. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Greg.
This I think is too important of a concept. I'm going to push this concept to our third talk.
Okay, I agree with you.
Always leave them wanting more.
Exactly. So you guys
that was not intentional. Yeah.
But we do want to leave you guys with this quote from Charles Duhigg, Power of Habits author. There's nothing you can't do if you get your habits right. So Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I will hand it over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Morgan. And I think, please, everybody, submit your questions using Q&A. We can record a follow-up video, I think, to address Q&A, and we can email that to everybody who is registered and attended here today. We do want to tell you about upcoming webinars. Our next webinar, we're going to have 2 in April. Coming up first, April 4th, Katie Anderson, author of the excellent book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn. She's going to be doing a webinar titled How to Create a Continuous Improvement Culture by Closing the Gaps. And there's an acronym. She's going to reveal what that acronym stands for. You can register now at KaiNexus.com/webinars. We invite you also to check out the webinars on demand library, including Greg and Morgan's Habits Part 1. Then next, I also want to tell you about a book contest. We are giving away 3 signed copies of Katie's book. We've been experimenting with doing book giveaways, and to enter, all you need to do is post or repost about the webinar on LinkedIn. You can use the hashtag KaiNexus. You can post a link to the registration page. We'll search for the hashtag, and we're going to choose 3 winners, and we'll send books out to folks. So thank you for helping us spread the word, and you get a contest entry for doing so. We have a blog at blog.kainexus.com. We encourage you to check that out. And then finally, our podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, any of the major or even minor platforms. The audio from today's session will be there if you would like to revisit it or share the session with others. So there was one question that came in from David Haig, and we'll encourage people to continue putting those in the Q&A, please. David says, first off statement, the persona concept is helpful, but what does it exclude? Are there functions or personas that may work in competition or be contrary against what the CI coach is trying to accomplish? Does that persona need to be considered differently?
I'll take a stab at this. I think it's an interesting concept to think through. I think when I'm thinking about personas, I'm probably stereotyping. I'm overgeneralizing. It's not going to encompass 100% of the people that are going to use your product, come to your website, or participate in your continuous improvement work. The idea is to figure out what's the general gist of what's going on. So there probably is a persona that could say that I am the contrarian. I do not want to participate in CI. I don't know how to. I probably would engage with that person. I don't know if I would want to create a habit loop that says, let's make sure this person continues to be the contrarian. But I do think it's important to think about how these different personas are interacting. It's going to be one of the main points that we're going to talk about in our next talk that Morgan and I are going to give. And I think that one of the main differences between a personal habit and an organizational habit is with an organizational habit, there might be a little bit less motivation that's internal, right? If I want to personally learn how to, play the guitar, that might be a really intense motivation. If you're trying to get people to, identify opportunities for improvement, they might not personally have that motivation. And so I think that kind of designing all of your persona habit loops to give each other more energy and sustainment is going to be important. I hope that addresses the question and or concept that David was trying to make.
Yeah, well, and if David is still on, or if he watches the recording here with the Q&A, encourage people, whether it's David or anyone else, you can email Greg or Morgan or myself. But more importantly, if you have questions, follow-up questions for Greg or Morgan as the presenters today, you can see their information there. And we will email you about the 3rd installment of this series and our other KaiNexus webinars. So I want to thank everyone for attending. Morgan and Greg, great job with this today. Thank you. Thank you again for doing this.
Thanks so much, Mark.
And Greg, I'll let you say it. We'll see you.
See you next time.
Next time. Thanks again.